How radical is the GOP? And does it matter? Is it something that African Americans should be concerned about? That's what I intend to answer in this video today. Stay tuned. Hello, I am Attorney Augustus Corbett, aka the Minister of Justice. I am one half of the Defiant Lawyers. Each and every week, typically on Saturday, we bring a legal analysis of trending politics, policies, personalities, and pop culture to empower you with the information you need to defy an unjust legal system. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe, like, share, comment. Help us with this channel. Help us get it out. Okay, so today we have an interesting topic. I'm going to talk about the African American struggle against a radicalized GOP. Look, I'm 61 years old. I'll be 62 in February, and I have seen a lot of changes in the Republican Party. As a matter of fact, I used to be a Republican, and so I'm somewhat familiar with the Republican Party. And by the way, I was also a Democrat before I became a Republican, and today I'm neither, by the way. I am an independent voter. I am happy being unaffiliated with both the Democrat and the Republican Party. But over my 61 years of living in this country, I have definitely seen a big change in the GOP. Now, in my memory, I can go back to, Ronald Reagan. I can go back to Ronald Reagan. I was living when Richard Nixon was in office, but I don't remember him. I wasn't politically active as I was during the Ronald Reagan era. I remember Reagan. I remember Reagan starting his campaign out in Money, Mississippi, the city or the town where Emmett Till was murdered, was lynched. He started his states' rights-oriented presidential campaign in that particular city. Well, I have seen, and by the way, his campaign slogan was, "Make America Great Again." Have we heard that before? Does that sound familiar? It absolutely does, because that is the campaign slogan of arguably, and I believe it's a strong argument, for the worst president maybe this country has ever seen, and that's Donald Trump, okay? So I've seen the GOP become an extremely radical organization, extremely. And I'm going to show you through videos how radical this party has become and why it matters to us as African Americans. Sometimes it feels like folks are not really listening. It feels like some African Americans are toned out. They don't really get it, don't want to face it, don't want to deal with it, or something. But like so many others in this space, we just got to continue to keep saying it and saying it and saying it and saying it until someone listens and until someone catches on. So the African American struggle against a radicalized GOP. GOP stands for Grand Old Party, and it is the Republican Party in particular. Now, let us get some definitions. First, let us define white nationalism, because that is what the GOP is radicalized with. White nationalism or white supremacy, okay? Let me give you a definition. What is white nationalism? White nationalism is a term that originated among white supremacists as a euphemism for white supremacy. So it's another way of saying white supremacy. Eventually, some white supremacists tried to distinguish it further by using it to refer to a form of white supremacy that emphasizes defining a country or region by white radical identity and which seeks to promote the interests of whites exclusively, typically at the expense of people of other backgrounds. So white nationalism is a euphemism of white supremacy. And white supremacy essentially is the belief, the false belief, that whites are superior and non-whites are inferior. And therefore, whites are entitled to rule, to control, to conquer, to have the best of wherever whites are. It is a false ideology. It is a sinful ideology, if you want to use religious terms. So white nationalism is just a euphemism. It sounds better, I think, to some people. It sounds less dangerous and hideous as white supremacy, but it's the same thing. It is the very same thing. Okay. Now, let me offer you some more information about white nationalism. This woman, who is the senior vice president, or was, of policy for the Anti-Defamation League, she said this as a panelist for a U.S. representative, a House discussion about white nationalism. She said white nationalism is one of the many euphemisms for white supremacy. The core ideology of white supremacy now used to be, before the Civil Rights Movement, to keep the dominance of the white race. Now, white nationalism is fear of the imminent genocide of the white race by a flood of non-whites and other people whom they consider degenerates, which they say that flood is orchestrated by Jews as parasitic puppeteers. So white supremacy or white nationalism used to focus on just keeping the white race dominant. While that is still a part of white nationalism, today it is more rooted in fear of being replaced, fear of being overtaken by non-white people. That's why we hear all the fear-mongering about immigration, about Jews not replacing us, about blacks, keeping blacks in their place. All this anti-black stuff that we see in the country today. And you're going to hear some of this. I got some video that I want you to hear that shows you that anti-black ideology of white supremacy. And so that's what white nationalism is today. Today, it's still all about dominating white dominance, but it also today is really fueled by fear, white fear, fear of being replaced, fear that America is browning, and it is. That is just the way it is. America is browning. And it is predicted that America will one day be a minority-majority country. That scares them to death. And that's been out there for some time. I remember when Pat Buchanan wrote a book back in the 80s, creating and instilling and stroking a lot of fear with whites about how whites were not having as many children as other groups of people. And because whites, this is the thing that they know that they don't want us to know, the general population. They don't want us to know that white people are really a minority in the world. They are the majority in America and are the majority in Europe. But across the world, across the 7 continents of the world, whites are a minority. And because they already know that they are a minority, they fiercely and violently will protect their status in countries like America and, of course, in Europe. All right, so that's what's fueling that fire. And then what really, really, really brought that front and center for the white community, that fear, was the election and re-election of Barack Obama. I mean, that was when they said, okay, this is real. This is getting real. We are really seriously about to lose this country if we haven't already. And what was their reaction? They elected Donald Trump, a man who tapped into that fear, a man who manipulated that fear and used that fear to catapult his own political career. And he's still doing so, right? So that's where that fear comes from. Now, when I talk about radical GOP, let's define what the word radical means. So, according to Merriam-Webster dictionary, radical is something that is very different from the usual or traditional. Now, let me talk about that a second, because we're used to the usual traditional white supremacist racism. We know that we live in a country that is a racist nation. It is a very racist nation. But we're used to the usual racism, right? The traditional racism. What we're dealing with today is a radical form of racism. It is different from the usual. It is different from the traditional. Things that were once silent are being said outright. Things that whites were once shamed to say, they're no longer ashamed of saying it. They're no longer ashamed of doing it. They are just pulling the scab off the sore. They are basically going for broke. Okay? So this is a radical form of white supremacy. It is very different from the usual. Also, we see here, radicalism favors extreme changes in existing views, habits, conditions, or institutions. So not just your regular run-of-the-mill changes, but extreme changes. Like when Marjorie Taylor Greene said blue and red states should just separate, right? Just separate. That's kind of dating back to the Civil War. And speaking of the Civil War, it really never ended. It really never ended. We're still fighting that battle, right? You know, after the Civil War ended, there was Reconstruction. And then for about 10, 11 years, Reconstruction got some things done, some good things. 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, the Civil Rights Act of 1866. But then Southerners were able to stop Reconstruction with the assassination of Lincoln and the appointment of Andrew Johnson to take over the presidency, and the deal that was struck between, I can't think of that president's name at the moment, with the South, that pretty much gave the North the presidency and gave the South again. And of course, they started with the Black Codes and all the other Jim Crow stuff that they did. But that war never ended. We're still fighting that war. It's just that we're fighting now a radical version of the Confederate leaning people, if you will. All right. Also, radical means associated with political views, practices, and policies of extreme change. So we're talking about extremism, advocating extreme measures to retain or restore a political state of affairs. Now, that's exactly what we're dealing with. What we're facing, what we're confronting, and what is confronting us is advocacy for extreme measures to retain or restore a political state of affairs. What political state of affairs? Where whites dominate. That is the state of affairs that they are doing everything they can to maintain that status quo. All right, so those are the definitions that I wanted to give you. Now I want to play several videos. And these videos will really bring home my point. Let me get this queued up. Okay, just stay with me here for a second. By the way, I hope you all are having a good day. I didn't greet you. I hope your day is good.
When Strom Thurmond ran for president, we voted for him. We're proud of it.
I don't know if you can hear that, but it sounds like...
And if the rest of the country had followed our lead, we wouldn't have had all these problems over all these years.
Because I want you to hear that well.
When Strom Thurmond ran for president, we voted for him.
Okay. All right. So let me go to that. Let me go to that video. All right. This is Trent Lott, Senator Trent Lott from Mississippi, former Senator Trent Lott. And Trent Lott was the majority leader during the presidency of young man Bush, or the younger Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, I think his name was or is. Okay. So Trent Lott was Senate Majority Leader when Bush was president. When Bush got elected president, the Republicans controlled the Senate, the House, and the White House. I remember that very, very, very well. And Trent Lott was the Senate Majority Leader. Now, the other person that you see is a deceased South Carolina racist, white supremacist senator. His name was Strom Thurmond. He was an outright, blatant white supremacist. He didn't try to hide it. Everybody knew it. He didn't care if you knew it. He was a Southern, okay, I won't use the word that I was just about to use. I'll keep it above board. But he was an adamant, fierce white supremacist. And he ran for president. And you heard Trent Lott said, you're going to hear it again, but Trent Lott said when Strom Thurmond ran as a segregationist for the U.S. presidency, Trent Lott said his state of Mississippi voted for him. So the majority of Mississippians voted for Strom Thurmond's segregated Republican platform, his ticket, to segregate the country by races. And Trent Lott, again, says his state voted for it. Now, let me play the video now. Here he goes.
When Strom Thurmond ran for president, we voted for him. We're proud of it. And if the rest of the country had followed our lead, we wouldn't have had all these problems over all these years either.
So, I wanted you to hear that. The Senate Majority Leader of the GOP, of the Republican Party, said that his state voted for Strom Thurmond's segregated ticket and that he was proud of it, and had the rest of the country voted for Strom Thurmond and voted him in the presidency and would have separated or segregated the races again as they were in the 50s and 40s and 30s. He said the country would not have had all the problems that they've dealt with over all those years. That statement was a blistering endorsement of white supremacy coming from the country's Senate Majority Leader. Now, that was back here 40 years ago, right? That was back here a long time ago. And back then, there was a little decency in the GOP because Trent Lott lost his Senate majority seat for making that statement. He lost his seat. He was forced to resign for making that statement, endorsing this white supremacist. But that was then. This is now. We're living in a completely different day today, because that statement, if that statement was made today, that would be celebrated. That would get him more applauses. That would get him more donations in today's GOP. That's why I entitled this, "Our Struggle Against a Radicalized GOP." Now, let's begin to look at how radical today's GOP is. And we're going to start with the senator of my state, Ted Cruz. Watch this.
When Strom Thurmond ran for president, we voted for him. We're proud of it. And if the rest of the country had followed our lead, we wouldn't have had all.
We also need to remove
another issue. This is also something that
we also
Did my video not work right? Just hang on with me here. Let me just check something, because I had old Ted set up here. You got to hear old Ted. You got to hear old Ted. Okay, where do I have Ted right there? Where you at, Ted? There's Ted.
we also need to remove
Sorry.
another issue. This is
Here's Ted.
I know if Jesse Helms were still with us,
There you go.
he would not shy away from it.
Okay, before we go further, Jesse Helms. Jesse Helms was another Strom Thurmond. Jesse Helms was a senator. Some of you all are so young you don't remember. But Jesse Helms was a North Carolina senator who was a blatant, mean-spirited white supremacist. I mean, a mean-spirited segregationist. He is dead too, and he's getting his reward right now, okay? Because that man's heart was full of hate. He was a hateful person. He was a racist person. He was a white supremacist person. Maybe he, I don't know, made some amends on his deathbed. I don't know. But for his public life, he was a vehemently racist individual. And you just heard the senator from Texas here. You just heard the senator from my state here in Texas applaud him. Now watch what Ted Cruz says.
I know if Jesse Helms were still with us, he would not shy away from this fight. I'll tell you something, Robert, that I am certain you don't know. The very first political contribution I ever made in my life was to Jesse Helms. When I was a kid, I sent $10 to Jesse Helms. Because they were beating up on him, they were coming after him hard, and I thought it wasn't right.
So first of all, you see here, Ted Cruz has been a racist since at least 10 years old. Thought I'd point that out.
And at the time, my allowance was 50 cents a week. So that was 20 weeks' income. I am willing to venture a guess that I may have been Jesse Helms' single largest donor as a percentage of annual income. But you know, there's another story I heard of Jesse Helms when he first ran. That he opened the mail and out fell a check for $5,000 from John Wayne. It's apparently a true story. And he looked at this check and he didn't know John Wayne, but you know, I mean, that was the John Wayne, and the address was California, so he decided he was going to call him. And
by the way, John Wayne. I posted a short of John Wayne, and I made the statement, or the video, yeah, I made the statement using that short that John Wayne was a white supremacist. And boy, I got tens of thousands of responses from people defending John Wayne. Well, we're hearing here that John Wayne was a huge supporter of Jesse Helms. And John Wayne admitted himself he was a white supremacist. But I got tens of thousands. As a matter of fact, that short got more than 1.3 million views. 1.3 million views. People watching that short clip where I asserted that John Wayne was a racist, a white supremacist. And that wasn't even debatable. But there were tens of thousands of people defending him. And there were also many other folks who knew that he was a racist. Okay? So I thought I'd mention that since Ted Cruz mentioned the Duke.
Thank him for this. So he spent some time trying to track down. It's not easy to figure out how do you call John Wayne, but he managed to figure out how to do so. And he placed the call, and the Duke answered the phone. And apparently Jesse Helms said, you know, Mr. Wayne, this is Jesse Helms. I just wanted to thank you for your tremendous support in this race. Apparently John Wayne said, who? And he said, well, Jesse Helms, I'm running for Senate in North Carolina. And apparently Wayne said, oh yeah, you're that guy saying all those crazy things. We need 100 more like you. The willingness to say all those crazy things is a rare characteristic in this town. And you know what? It's every bit as true now as it was then. We need 100 more, like Jesse Helms in the U.S. Senate.
Now, how much more racist could Ted Cruz actually be? He endorsed one of the Senate's most racist people to ever be a senator, certainly within modern history. The Senate has been full of many racists. Don't misunderstand me. Jesse Helms was at the top of that list. And here, the sitting senator for the state of Texas said the Senate need 100 more like Jesse Helms. 100 more like Jesse Helms. Now, here's the difference in this Senate and the Senate back with Trent Lott. Trent Lott paid a price for endorsing Strom Thurmond. Ted Cruz has paid no price for publicly endorsing this bigot, this racist, this white supremacist. So why is it that Ted Cruz can say those things about Jesse Helms, literally say we need 100 more Jesse Helms? Do you know what this country would be if there were 100 Jesse Helms in the Senate? Can you imagine what that would be for black people? Can you just imagine? Can you imagine 100 Jesse Helms in the United States Senate? Can you imagine? Yet that's what Ted Cruz advocates, the senator from Texas. And instead of that costing him anything, including reputation or anything, it boosted him. Why? Because the GOP is radicalized today. Back when Trent Lott was Senate Majority Leader, white racists were sort of at least put on the back burner. It wasn't nice to say such things. People still believed them, but it wasn't nice to articulate publicly those types of things. That is not the day that we live in. So I wanted to show you that.
Another issue. This is something.
We also need to remove the incentives to come.
All right, let's look at Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis. Let's see how radical this guy is.
We also need to remove the incentives to come illegally to begin with. And that means employment, that means taxpayer finance benefit. It also means this idea that you can come across the border 2 days later, have a child, and somehow that's an American citizen. That was not the original understanding of the 14th Amendment. And so we'll take action to force a clarification of that. But I think it's wrong that people would use our country for things like birth tourism. So we're going to be removing the incentives to come into this country illegally.
This is big. This is huge. This man says that he's going to try to change the 14th Amendment, one of the Reconstruction Amendments, the amendment that protects equal protection rights of African Americans, that protects due process rights of African Americans, and that protects citizenship rights of African Americans. It was added to the Constitution because of the Dred Scott decision. It was added to the Constitution because Chief Justice Roger Taney said that blacks were not citizens of this country because their mothers were Africans. Therefore, whites had no obligation to respect any rights of any black person. And so during Reconstruction, the 14th Amendment was added to basically overturn what Taney said in the Dred Scott decision. And where Ted Cruz says that it's not right for somebody to just be here, just arrive to this country, and in a day or two have a child, and that child is a citizen, he is flat wrong. That is precisely what the 14th Amendment was added to the Constitution to do. So that when an African woman was taken off that horrid boat from those chains and her feet hit the soil of America and she had a baby, that child was an American citizen. That is precisely why the 14th Amendment was added. You go to one of the core principles of the 14th Amendment when you start dealing with birthright citizenship. We cannot allow that to happen. That's the struggle we have against radicalized GOP folks. Because think about it, it's a slippery slope. If they tinker with the 14th Amendment, if they tinker with citizenship, birthright citizenship, then what's next? Equal protection under the law? Due process? These amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, were added for the sole purpose of protecting black people. So if the GOP can weasel their way into modifying or changing or amending the 14th Amendment in any respect, they won't stop with that. Just like they destroyed the Voting Rights Act. Just like they just destroyed taking race into consideration as one factor in college admissions. They're coming for all of this. That is them sounding the alarm. And of course, strong borders, any nation needs strong borders. Don't misunderstand me. In a fair immigration system, any country needs that. And by the way, it's my understanding that Florida is suffering now because of all this rhetoric coming from DeSantis that has caused a whole lot of immigrant workers to abandon Florida. And Florida badly needs those workers. That's my understanding. But if they can start tinkering and amending these critical, crucial amendments of the Constitution, these statutes, man, they can literally set African Americans completely back. That's why this is entitled The African American Struggle Against a Radicalized GOP. This is not normal stuff here. This is not the usual traditional racism that we all are sort of accustomed to as African Americans. This is different. This is on a high level. They're going at the planks that protects the rights of African Americans. Why? because again, they fear a takeover. They fear their replacement. Again, Obama was elected and reelected. Kamala Harris was elected. What does that say to them? We're losing our country. And wasn't that the very thing that Trump came in office campaigning on? Wasn't that the very thing that he used to bring about January 6th? We'll look at that in a moment. This is not your regular GOP. That's not what this is at all. This is a radical GOP.
Another issue, this is also something that your opponents, Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump.
All right, this is one of the Republican candidates by the name of Vivek. Let's hear what he has to say.
Another issue, this is also something that your opponents, Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump, have called for, including DeSantis very recently, which is an end to birthright citizenship. What's your position on that? Would you end birthright citizenship?
I think for a period of time, I think it's going to be necessary in this country because we have an influx of migrants across that southern border, 14,000 plus per day by some estimates crossing that southern border. That is not the rule of law. That is the abandonment of the rule of law.
Both of your parents are immigrants to the United States, so you would have been a beneficiary of birthright citizenship, but you now are saying you would ban that for people coming into the country. And what is the period of time for which that would be the case?
For people.
Another issue, this is also.
All right, so you heard this guy say that he would ban birthright citizenship there with DeSantis. One of the things that we see happening with the GOP right now is if you really want to get the support of the rank and file GOP, they are so radicalized that you got to out-radicalize. You got to be more radical than your opponent. If your opponent says that he is in favor or she is in favor of banning birthright citizenship, you got to go further. Well, I'll ban birthright citizenship and I'll set aside equal protection under the 14th Amendment. I mean, we just gotta take a stand. And then the moment somebody hear that, then the other candidate is like, well, you know what? I'll do more than that. Not only will I ban birthright citizenship and overturn and get rid of equal protection under the law, I will also do away with the due process clause in the 14th Amendment. In other words, we got to do what we got to do to stop this woke crowd. Okay? We got to do what we got to do to stop this woke crowd. That's what we're dealing with here, people. That's the kind of radicalism that I am referring to here. Okay?
Do you believe they should allow?
Okay, now let's go to Senator Tommy Tuberville. Senator Tommy Tuberville to get a little bit more of this radical GOP that's going on here. Listen at Tuberville.
Do you believe they should allow white nationalists in the military?
Well, they call them that. I call them Americans.
Do you want to explain those comments, Senator?
Yeah, first of all, I'm totally against any type of racism, okay? I was a football coach for 40 years, and I dealt and had opportunity to be around more minorities than anybody up here on this hill. But when our military has been...
Wow. Everybody knows that white nationalism is white supremacy. That is the classic definition. Why Tuberville walked around the Capitol building saying that white nationalists were mere Americans? I don't know. Was it because as a football coach, he's not very sophisticated on these things? Was he doing what we've seen white conservatives do so often, co-opt the term and try to redefine it? I don't know. But this was weird, okay? And then did you just hear him say because he was a college coach, he been around more minorities than anyone on the Hill? So is he talking about even more than the black people on the Hill? Really? So you've been around more black people than black people? Come on, man.
Was being attacked after 9/11, after January 6th, and that was my first day on the Senate floor. I thought it was outrageous of what senators from the Democratic side, Chuck Schumer said on the floor that night, calling out people, calling people racist, calling people nationalists, white nationalists. White nationalists is just another word that they want to use other than racism. I'm totally against anything to do with racism. But the thing about being a white nationalist is just a cover word.
You can't be against racism and support white nationalism at the same time. White nationalism is white supremacy, is racism. Again, I don't know if this guy was confused. He just didn't know. He was trying to co-opt the term, but it was weird. It was weird seeing him do this.
For the Democrats now, where they can use it to try to make people mad across the country, identity politics. I'm totally against that. But I'm for the American people. I'm for military. I'm for Christian conservatives, Democrats, whoever wants to be in the military to fight for this country, to protect this country. That's what it's all about.
But just to be clear, you agree that white nationalists should not be serving in the U.S. military. Is that what you're saying?
If people think that a white nationalist is a racist, I agree with that. I agree
A white nationalist is someone who believes that the white race is superior to other races.
Well, that's some people's opinion. And I don't think, I mean, a lot. Pardon?
What's your opinion?
My opinion of a white nationalist, if somebody wants to call him white nationalist, to me is an American. It's an American. Now, if that white nationalist is a racist, I'm totally against anything that they want to do, because I am 110.
The people that marched in Charlottesville chanting, "Jews will not replace us," were all white nationalists. The KKK and all its members are white nationalists. A white nationalist is a racist. It is a person who believes that white supremacy should be the law of the land. And incidentally, this guy made his career, as he said, coaching football, which means he was around a whole lot of black folks, not more than the black folks on the Hill, but he was around a lot of young black men. He made a lot of money, built his career on the backs of young black men. And yet, all the time, all of this stuff was in his heart. But here's the point I'm really making, showing Tuberville's video. That is, he can say that and get away with it in today's GOP. That's not even extreme in today's GOP. Now, he did eventually...
one of the reasons I ran, because the last 10, 15...
I'm sorry, he did eventually... I guess he got pressured to stop saying that stupid stuff. So he stopped. But here's another video of Tuberville. Let's go back.
One of the reasons I ran, because the last 10, 15 years, I saw the direction our country was going because of what we're doing in education. And folks, we are in bad shape, and if we don't change it, we're not going to change this country back to what all of us in here grew up and had an opportunity to grow up in. So
I had to comment on that. He said, if you don't change this country, then all of us are not going to be able to go back to the America that they all grew up in. So I got to assume, Tuberville and I are probably about the same age. So I can go back to the 60s. I heard my ancestors talk about the 50s, the 40s, the 30s. And trust me, those are not days that America needs to go back to. Yeah, they were good for Tuberville and other whites because black folks were sharecroppers. Black folks were contract laborers. Black folks were in extreme poverty. Many still are. Black folks had to walk on the other side of the street, and when a white person came on the street, on their side of the street, the black person had to drop his head and yes sir, and a black person could easily get lynched and all sorts of things back in the day that he is reminiscing about, that he is desiring to take America back to. That's what they're talking about when they say make America great again. These are hardcore, radicalized white supremacists who are running the GOP. And that is the struggle that we African Americans are up against, and we need to face it so that we can strategize and fight it before we end up just where he's talking about.
In closing,
I'm just showing you some of the radical stuff that's coming from the GOP.
In closing, let me just say that this is difficult today, but let me assure my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that we are not playing games. Let me assure my colleague on the other side of the aisle that we take this very seriously and we take it very personally. Let me assure my colleagues on the other side, when we use a defense bill, when we use our military, I'm old enough to remember when black officers, when women were not allowed to serve. You are setting us back on this floor on both sides of the aisle. We have people of color, we have people who have served, women who have served, and on this side of the aisle, and to use it to deny women rights to their reproductive rights, to use this as an excuse and a political maneuver. We are so serious that this has become something that is very difficult for us to stand on this floor and work with you and look at you for something that is so appalling.
Time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Members are reminded again to direct their comments to the chair. Gentleman from Arizona.
Well, Mr. Chairman, though that was unbelievably inspiring, my amendment has nothing to do with whether or not colored people or black people or anybody can serve, okay? It has nothing to do with color,
Mr. Speaker,
any of that stuff. What we want to preserve and maintain is the fact that our military does not become a social experiment. We want the best of the best. We want to have standards that guide who's in what unit, what they do. And I'm going to tell you guys right now, the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, the North Koreans, they are not doing this because they want the strongest military possible. I hope my colleagues on the other side can understand what we're doing. Thank you so much.
Mr. Speaker, asking to be recognized to have the words colored people.
For what purposes does the gentlelady seek recognition?
I'd like to be recognized to have the words colored people stricken from the record. I find it offensive and very inappropriate.
Is the gentlelady asking for unanimous consent to take down the words?
I am asking for unanimous consent to take down the words of referring to me or any of my colleagues as colored people.
For what purposes, the gentleman from Arizona?
Can I amend my comments to people of color?
The gentleman wishes to amend his comments. Is the gentleman asking consent?
Mr. Speaker, to have the word stricken. I didn't ask for an amendment.
Is there unanimous consent to have the word stricken? Without objection, so ordered.
All right. This GOP is so radical that it's acceptable, even celebrated, to call black people colored people in the well of the House. Colored people. Now, we saw Trent Lott was forced to give up his leadership position because he celebrated a white supremacist. We have seen in today's GOP, we saw Ted Cruz praise and wish there were 100 Jesse Helms in the Senate. We heard Tuberville say that white nationalists are just Americans. We heard this congressperson call black folks colored people. He knew exactly what he was saying. This guy was a former Navy SEAL. He knew exactly what he was saying. And by the way, the argument that he made is stupid. Because just because the military is diverse does not mean the military is any way weakened. Diversity is a plus for this nation. It makes the nation stronger and better when it's diverse. And when the military is trying to make those diverse populations feel a part of the military. I've been in the military. I'm a U.S. Navy veteran. And I know how African Americans feel from their white soldier counterparts in the military. And so it is a great thing. The military, in other words, is a very racist entity. Very. Extremely. I served. I know that for a fact. And for General Milley and God, I forgot the name of the black Secretary of Defense. Please forgive me. To implement programs to try to for diversity and to try to make those diverse populations feel a part of the military. That is a great thing. That's not going to weaken the military. The implication is the military can only be strong if white men serve in the military. That is white supremacy, pure and simple.
You really have to wonder.
But there's more.
In fact, you know, if we would have said 3 weeks ago, Blake, if we would have said that Joy Reid and Michelle Obama and Sheila Jackson Lee and Ketanji Brown Jackson were affirmative action picks, we would have been called the racist. But now they're coming out and they're saying it for us. They're coming out and they're saying, I'm only here because of affirmative action. Yeah, we know. You do not have the brain processing.
They did not say that they were only there because of affirmative action. That's a blankety blank lie. All those women were highly qualified women. And had it not been for affirmative action, highly qualified or not, they would have not gotten the consideration to getting into those schools. He's lying. Charlie Kirk here, this is who this is. He's lying when he said it was only because of affirmative action that they got into those schools. Those women are brilliant women. Ketanji Brown, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, First Lady, former First Lady Michelle Obama. And I just heard yesterday, Steve Bannon, I don't even like repeating it, but just to show you the radical nature of the GOP. I heard him almost call Michelle Obama Big Mike because the GOP has circulated a rumor that our precious, beautiful black queen, Michelle Obama, is a transvestite whose name is Mike. They have said that. They've circulated that demonic vicious lie against our beautiful, regal, dignified, brilliant former first black first lady of this country. That's how radical these people are. And watch what else Charlie Kirk says.
Power to otherwise be taken really seriously. You had to go steal a white person's slot to go be taken somewhat seriously.
When he said that, my mouth dropped. He says that they had to go steal a white person's seat to be taken somewhat seriously. That comes from a man who's a member of a race who stole this country, who stole this land, and then stole the labor to build it. And he's talking about somebody stealing a seat. The gaslighting is through the roof of our white counterparts. It is through the roof. It's like they're deluded. Dude, you're talking about somebody stealing seats. You stole this land. You stole this land and then stole labor to build the land. Whew. Wow.
USA!
Finally, to really drive home the point, this is my last video of how radical this GOP is. Let's turn our attention to January 6th.
January 6, 2021, Trump supporters from across the country gathered in the nation's capital to protest Congress's certification of the 2020 presidential election results.
To use a favorite term that all of you people really came up with, we will stop the steal.
At a rally near the White House, President Trump spoke to a crowd estimated in the thousands, everyone from ordinary Americans to conspiracy theorists to members of right-wing extremist groups.
We will never give up. We will never concede.
Trump repeated the lie that the election was stolen, urging his supporters to march to the Capitol and fight.
You'll never take back our country with weakness. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
This is why that man right there, he's the reason why the GOP is as radicalized as it is. He tapped into that fear, into that anger, and used it for his political gain. And because of the election and re-election of Barack Obama, they were very vulnerable to this guy. And because of the legacy of white supremacy that already exists in the GOP, that was a match, that was a perfect match for a person like Donald Trump. So this is how radical these folks are.
Around 1 p.m., as Trump is wrapping up his remarks in the park, the day turned violent. A group of his supporters on the western side of the Capitol confront the handful of police guarding the barriers and force their way through. Moments after Mr. Trump finished his more than hour-long speech, thousands of protesters streamed from that rally site directly to the U.S. Capitol grounds. Several people told us that day they expected Vice President Pence to overturn the 2020 election results.
What needs to happen today is Vice President Pence needs to not open the 7 state electors' envelopes for the states that I mentioned. Set them aside and send it all back to those state legislatures.
That is radical, not to mention unconstitutional and illegal. But they don't care about that because they're that radicalized.
As the crowd grows, clashes between Trump supporters and Capitol police officers, clearly outnumbered, intensified.
We're not going to take it anymore. This is our country.
Outside, the Capitol's West Front became a battleground. Inside, the joint session of Congress to certify election results was underway. The traditionally ceremonial process is upended by Republicans, led by Representative Paul Gosar of Arizona and Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, challenging Trump's loss. Meanwhile, around 2 p.m., the East Side...
And Ted Cruz, wow, he is in the back pocket of Donald Trump, although Donald Trump called his wife ugly, called his wife Heidi ugly. And said Ted Cruz's father took part in the Kennedy assassination. And yet Ted Cruz is one of his most fierce supporters.
Barricades are breached. Here's what I saw from outside the Capitol.
Half an hour ago, vehicle barriers that had been set up a good 100 yards away or so from the Capitol were first breached by a group of protesters. Capitol Hill police retreated a little bit more. Then hundreds more protesters started to stream up this walkway in front of the Capitol. It is a remarkable scene.
On the West Front, the mob tore down scaffolding, battled their way through the last line of police defense, and broke into the Capitol building itself. NewsHour congressional correspondent Lisa Desjardins was inside the building reporting live as it happened.
Judy, there are protesters. Protesters have now broken into the U.S. Capitol.
And it will stand in recess until the call of the chair.
The Senate was called into recess and evacuated. The mob of Trump supporters roamed the historic halls, damaging property and searching for lawmakers. Security footage captured the moment Capitol Police Officer Eugene Goodman shuttled Republican Senator Mitt Romney of Utah to safety before running ahead to divert the approaching mob away from the Senate chamber. Rioters came within 100 feet of Vice President Mike Pence, whose security detail took him to safety from an office near the Senate. While this was happening at 2:24 p.m., Trump tweeted from the White House, criticizing Pence for not having, quote, the courage to do what should have been done. Remarkably, the House was still in session when rioters attempted to break into that chamber. A police officer shot Ashley Babbitt, an Air Force veteran from California and QAnon conspiracy theorist, as she and a crowd tried to break into the rear of the chamber where some lawmakers were still sheltering. According to an analysis from the New York Times, rioters breached the Capitol in at least 8 different places. They entered the Rotunda, Statuary Hall, and the Senate chamber. Some broke into the offices of lawmakers, including House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's.
That's how radical the GOP is. That's how radical. That's what we're up against, especially us African Americans, because a lot of this has to do with us. Now, you hear a lot of talk about transvestite, LGBTQ+, but make no qualms about it. This is about race. 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 That's what this country has always been about, and it looks like it will always be about race. So now we can sit back like everything is fine and twiddle our fingers, twiddle our thumbs, and overlook all this that's going on around us. But we are being attacked. Our rights are being attacked from the Supreme Court to Congress to state legislatures to lone actors out here murdering people. We're in those days. We are definitely in those days. They feel like that they're fighting for their survival, and that's precisely what we're fighting for. We are up against a radicalized GOP who will do anything to try to get back to this nostalgic notion of an America where whites dominated and blacks were in their place. That's what we're dealing with. And I showed it to you. I showed it to you here. All right, comments. Oh, I think my dear sister Ave Aldridge, thank you so much for all your comments. What a great topic of discussion. Thank you so much, Sister Ave. Sounds like a familiar slogan. Yes, Jesse Helms had a dark, ugly heart. Yeah, we as North Carolinians remember him very well. Steve, someone here, wasn't too happy with today's presentation. He says, sir, after listening to your BS, now I know why you only have 2 people watching this blank. Have a good day. Okay, Steve. Sister Ave made some additional comments. Thank you so much. There's some African Americans out there who know what we're up against. And we're going to keep telling the story. We're going to keep sounding the alarm. Because, again, we're dealing with a very radical GOP, point blank. So that's going to be the end of the show today. Thank you all so much for joining me today. Please like, share, comment. It's really important that you like the video. If you would, just go ahead and like it. Go, and not on Facebook. Facebook too, but especially on YouTube. That's kind of where we focus. We send our live feed to Facebook, but our real focus is YouTube. And by the way, we're growing. We are growing. We've grown 3,000-4,000 people in the last month. So folks are listening. So yeah, help us grow it even more. Make sure you go to YouTube and like. That gets YouTube algorithms' attention, basically. And then it starts pushing the video. So if you would help us grow it. And of course, we know, Steve, trying to troll us and throw shade that a lot of folks didn't listen thus far, and there will be a lot more, trust me. But a lot of folks didn't tune in to the live today. Well, that's because folks don't want to hear this. If we were up here talking foolishness, it would be Phil right now. But we're here empowering the African American community and calling out the white community. And yes, there are a whole lot of folks who would rather look the other way, and a whole lot of people like Steve who deny the truth, the facts of what's really going on. But despite that, we're growing. We are growing. All right. But again, thank you to every one of you who did tune in. And that's going to do it for me today. And I'm going to take you out with a commercial. So here we go. Peace.
Ever since I was a child, I've always hated bullies. I was that child. If I saw another kid getting picked on in class or at the lockers, I would stand up for that kid. I couldn't stand seeing bullying. But there was one incident with a teacher that almost silenced me. It is my first clear memory of racism and discrimination. It's still so vivid. Decided to hand paint butterflies and flowers on our faces in anticipation of the school event. So we all went one by one up to her so that she could paint our face. When it was my turn to get my face painted, my teacher told me, "I can't paint your face because your skin is too dark." I was mortified, embarrassed, and deeply ashamed. In that moment, even though I wanted to say something, I couldn't get the words out. So I walked back to my desk, I sat down, and I stared blankly at my desk until the bell rang. When I got home from school that day, my parents knew something was wrong. But I remember being so reluctant to tell them. I really don't know why. When I finally did, obviously they were furious. And let's just say the next day at school was one to remember. But this incident taught me a valuable lesson. It taught me to always stand up against racism, discrimination, and injustice. It fortified my resolve to fight for the vulnerable and voiceless. Just like my clients' voices are taken when they are wrongfully accused of a crime, subjected to banking while black, fighting for custody of their children, or fighting for just compensation from stingy insurance companies. My name is Attorney Chloe Corbett, also known as the Duchess of Justice. I am one half of Corbett & Corbett Law Firm and the Defiant Lawyers. We're here to fight for justice for the accused, the oppressed, the vulnerable, and the voiceless. You can find us in Dallas, Texas. Go to our website, www.corbettfirm.com. Improving lives and impacting laws.